Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Monday Williamsburg City Council work session. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Ms. McKay?
Ms. Williams, here. Ms. Ramsey,
Here.
Mayor Pons,
Here.
Vice Mayor Dent,
Here.
Ms. Kearns here.
Yeah, so Ms. Ramsey has a cold and laryngitis, so she will be giving thumbs up and thumbs down when needed. So please indulge her. We appreciate you coming in, making the time to be with us today. Okay, so items on the agenda. First is council preview. Mr. Trivett, what do we have coming up?
Yeah, so on Thursday, we have a public hearing regarding the Chesapeake Bay Preservation Guidelines in the zoning chapter. And then our monthly operating report is going to be the fire department to talk about RAVE as the new citywide emergency alert system. Under new business, we have consideration of the bids for the dewatering of the lagoons. And then next is consideration and action regarding the bulk water supply agreement between the city and Newport News. We have renewal of the solid waste collection contract between the city and Republic. We have the authorization to pursue emergency and non-emergency utility services contracts for Public Works, a consideration of updating the mutual aid agreement between Camp Perry and the city. We have the MOA consideration of the MOA between the federal government for the use of iPods in the city. A budget amendment to consider some grants and a donation that was received. We have a state mandated change to the code regarding tax exemptions for the spouses of certain members of the United States Armed Forces who died in the line of duty. And then we have a resolution recommending the appointment to an appointment to the Board of Equalization, followed by additional consideration of appointments to boards and commissions.
Good. Well, thank you, Mr. Trivett. Are there any questions? Okay. Takes us now to public comments, and I do have a number of speakers cards, so I'll go ahead and call them out as I have them. And first I have Mr. Henry Hart. Welcome, sir. Just state your name and address for the record, and please keep your comments to about 5 minutes.
Yes,
Thank you. Welcome.
yes, I realize I only have 5 minutes, so I'm going to read a prepared statement. I think if I had more time, I would just tell stories and more stories. As you know, the problem we've been having in the Indian Springs neighborhood is a result of student rental houses. When 4 or 5 students live in a house without a landlord, the house is sometimes used as an off-campus fraternity or sorority. Hundreds of students attend the parties, and then drunken students block the street, shout obscenities at residents, urinate in public, and generally create mayhem until the police arrive. I could give you more details, but I think you're aware of the problem. I'm especially concerned because my wife and I live next to the old Hornsby house, which has already been used for a large disruptive party. Now the new owner, Michael Field, plans to build 2 student rental houses behind the Hornsby house. The 2 houses on the other side of us, which were once occupied by families, are now occupied by students who also like to have disruptive parties. So we'll be surrounded. My wife and I have lived at 309 Indian Springs for about 28 years, and we've watched more and more single-family homes turn into student rental houses, and the property around the houses fall into disrepair. I think of the houses as dominoes that keep falling. You might think that's melodramatic, but it's a fact that Indian Springs is rapidly turning into an extension of the William and Mary campus. If the students and landlords knew how to be good neighbors, there wouldn't be a problem. But there is a problem, and it's been getting worse. The main point I want to make is this. It seems to me the City Council needs to decide whether or not it wants to have residential neighborhoods around the William and Mary campus. As I'm sure you know, most of the permanent residents in the neighborhoods have worked hard to make their homes attractive places to live, so we want to keep our residential neighborhood a residential neighborhood. There are plenty of regulations that restrict the sorts of houses we can build in our neighborhood. I believe there should be a regulation that will make sure that our neighborhood remains a neighborhood. Now I can tell a story. No, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hart. Next speaker's card I have is Ms. Susanna Livingston. Good afternoon and welcome.
Hello, thanks for this opportunity. My name is Susanna Livingston. I'm married to Henry, who just spoke, 309 Indian Springs Road. I'm just going to take a minute or two to offer some thoughts about possible developments on Indian Springs. So we moved to Indian Springs in 1997 when our son was 3 weeks old. We immediately loved the neighborhood's character. It was peaceful, it was friendly, full of longtime residents. 10 or 12 years ago, as many of us know, investors started buying up houses and renting them to William and Mary parents who didn't flinch at the high per-student rental fees. Since then, cars have clogged the street, trash bins stay out all week long, students drive at high speed past houses with small children, houses go unpainted and yard debris lies around for months at a time. Drunk undergrads in the street yell obscenities at people like me who are just trying to drive home from Food Lion. Yes, this happened to me, and I know similar things have happened to our friends in the neighborhood. There is a major shortage of student beds on the William and Mary campus. We all know this. The college also has a very strict policy regarding alcohol on campus. So please, please make no mistake. As long as the city and absentee landlords allow it, undergrads who are intent on partying and getting drunk together will continue to bring their bad behavior to nice old neighborhoods like Indian Springs, and those neighborhoods may not recover. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Dennis Hines. Welcome, sir.
Hello, Mayor Pons. I'm Dennis Hines, and I've watched you all afar in Gainesville, Florida, through the internet for actually many years. My wife, Caroline, and I just moved to Williamsburg, and this is our year anniversary. We specifically chose Indian Springs, the neighborhood, because we knew of it from family that has lived here for many years. In any case, I'm here to voice our concern because we also live next to student rental. We've experienced huge parties that are just out of control. And I can go into really detail about this, but thankfully we don't have young kids. There are young kids in our neighborhood as well. So we're past that stage. But we came from Gainesville, Florida. The University of Florida is 6-7 times larger than the College of William and Mary. So you can imagine, and we lived in an old neighborhood, just like Indian Springs, close to campus. We have witnessed what I call student creep, that because the university, students have very high expectations of what they want and where they live with internet, et cetera. So they choose to live off campus. Their parents often buy the house. I get it. You know, it's investment, saves money. At the same time, and then it becomes a perpetual rental. This is what's happening in our neighborhood right now, and it's real shame. And I'm asking for your assistance to help enforce the codes that are currently in place. Noise, parking, public gathering, behavior. I know that college also has codes, student conduct codes, things like that. Believe me, we're going to contact them as well to help reel in their own behavior. There's a lot of finger pointing going on. This is not our jurisdiction. That has got to stop because we have seen this creep in Gainesville, and areas that were once just like our neighborhood now are called student ghettos. This is what happens. And we've seen in Gainesville, lovely college university community, the same thing happen, and there's no recovery. Once it's a rental and people are realizing the business part of this, and the landlords are not held accountable for occupancy compliance, these types of things, it will just go on, it will happen. And as was mentioned by my neighbor, Henry, it's dominoes. And this is what's happening right now. We ask your help to please assist us in not only forcing existing codes, but to let's get this before it goes out of control, or else you'll lose a beautiful neighborhood like Indian Springs, and our adjacent neighborhoods are experiencing some of the same things. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate you coming forward. Mr. Joseph Heyman? Good afternoon, sir.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Joseph Heyman, 130 Indian Springs. Been a resident for close to 50 years, so I've seen quite a few changes that have occurred in that time period. We dearly love the city. We moved here because of the nature of the neighborhood. You're hearing from our neighbors, from myself, from others, that there is something wrong, and it is becoming dramatically worse because of a decision that was made that allowed a piece of property to suddenly become a cornerstone for 3 buildings that will become student commercial homes. We love students. We did not move to Williamsburg to live in a dormitory. We're asking you, think for a moment about your legacy. Is this council going to stand and ignore a tragedy that's happening to this magnificent small community? Or are you going to find some way to address these issues and try to put a harness on commercial real estate run amok? We do not wish to live in a dormitory. We ask you to think about your legacy. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker's card is Mr. Jim Heller. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm at 328 Indian Springs, been in Williamsburg for 37 years, half of that time's in Indian Springs. A couple things about the Hornsby properties. First, the Hornsby house is very large. We all know they're going to be put more than four kids in there. The 2 houses they propose to build, each are about 2,000 square feet. The upstairs in each house has 4 bedrooms. Each bedroom has a bathroom. As Mr. Heyman said, it's a dormitory, and we know they're going to put more than 4 kids in there. That's going to happen. So you could have as many as 18 or 20 kids in those 3 properties surrounding the Hart Livingston residence. I'm going to talk about purpose a little bit. You probably know all about the zoning regulations and the ARB guidelines, but I'm going to talk about those because they have a lot to do with character, not just fenestrations or the color of paint or the size of pillars and stuff like that, but it should be interpreted much more broadly than that. First, the zoning ordinances, 21.1 of the Warrensburg Ordinance. The zoning ordinance is intended to promote the health, safety, and general welfare of the public, and to provide for the orderly and controlled development of the city. We do not have orderly and controlled development in Indian Springs anymore, nor probably on Burns Lane or any number of other neighborhoods close to the college. Single-family dwelling district, RS2, which is what Indian Springs and Burns Lane are. The Statement of Intent, 21-161. This district is established as a single-family residential area with low population density. The regulations are designed to stabilize and protect the essential characteristics of the land and promote and encourage a suitable environment for family life. That's in the regulations the council has promulgated. Suitable environment for family life, okay? To these ends, development is limited to a relatively low density and permitted uses are limited basically to providing homes for the residents. We have some homes there. More and more we have houses that just have students in them. Architectural review, Article 9. The statement of intent, the Architectural Preservation District is established to preserve, protect, enhance, and maintain the architecture excellence and historic importance of the Colonial Williamsburg Historic Area, and to recognize other areas of the city having a historic architectural and cultural significance. These regulations are intended to create an atmosphere for compatible future growth to prevent the intrusion of adverse environmental influences. I hate to talk that way about students because both my kids went to William & Mary, but we do have a lot of adverse environmental influences, not only in terms of behavior, but in terms of property maintenance and everything else. The guidelines, the design review guidelines, the guiding principle is to enhance the quality of life for all residents and visitors by preserving communities' character and desirable aesthetic features. Nothing is being done to preserve the character of our communities. They were designed to be established as single-family dwellings. That's just almost long gone. They've talked about enforcement a little bit. There's a lot of enforcement that's not being done, not only by the parking ambassadors or something like that. I followed them on the streets before. I just watched them go right by cars, by student cars. Sometimes you have as many as 13 or 14 cars in front of three rentals that we know about. Clearly, there's more than 3 or 4 kids in each of them. We know that when there's complaints about excessive noise, litter, or other violations, you can revoke their certificate of occupants. As far as I know, it's never happened. We complain all the time to the city and to the police department about these violations. They talked about them, and really nothing is ever done. The police come, the party ends, a few weeks later, it starts out again. And one more thing, this is almost a question than anything else. There is a special exemption in 21-238 that permits renting bedrooms to roomers. I know that doesn't apply directly in our situation, but it's the way I read it. If you have roomers in your house, you have to live in the house. That's the way I read it. My reading of these regulations indicates that these rentals are more regulated than when a non-resident owner, an absentee landlord, rents out an entire house. Absentee landlords can rent out entire houses, but they can't rent out bedrooms, it looks like. So, here's what I got. Bedroom rentals to roomers are allowed throughout the residential districts, that's us, but are limited to owner-occupied dwellings. That's in the code. By a single-family dwelling shall be deemed owner-occupied only so long as it's regularly occupied by an adult individual who owns at least 50% undivided fee simple interest in it and regularly occupies it as his or her principal place of residence. Why someone who wants to rent out rooms has to own the house, but they can rent out an entire house and not have to be there? Absentee landlords who live in Northern Virginia, Virginia Beach, wherever they happen to be. Also, the same thing applies to a limited liability company or corporation. They have to have majority of the people involved live in the house.
Mr. Heller, you can wrap it up. You've over your 5 minutes.
Am I done? One more thing?
Real quick.
Okay, the final thing, the Downtown Residential District, RDT, thank you. This district is established to promote harmonious development and redevelopment of the downtown residential areas adjacent to CW and William & Mary. The regulations are designed to maintain and encourage the existing small-scale pedestrian character of this area and to encourage a harmonious mixture of residential uses. We're beyond that.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming forward. Next speaker's card I have is Mr. John Swaddell. You can just state your name and address for the record and keep your
John
comments about
Swaddle, 141 Indian Springs Road. Thanks for listening. I'm also a professor at William & Mary. I interact with students every day, so what I'm going to say is not really anti-student. It is about the shift that's happening in Indian Springs Road that I see, that I've lived on for close to 20 years. And the recent purchasing of properties that are next to each other for the specific purposes of commercially developing those properties for rental very likely targeting the student population, given what we've seen on Indian Springs Road. So the cluster that is being purchased right now and developed specifically for rental properties seems to be a shift. Of course, we've had students living on Indian Springs Road for a long time. Many of those students are good neighbors. But when you get student houses right next to each other, especially in this new design of having properties being built specifically for student rental purposes in a cluster of 3, well, that will then house at least a dozen or so students right next to each other with shared common spaces. That will change the characteristic of the neighborhood fundamentally. Within one of those properties, we already have had a multi-hundred person, for lack of better terms, rager happen this spring that included incidents of public urination, public indecency, verbal assaults on neighbors, DUIs. If we allow for these kinds of shifts to happen within the residential neighborhoods, we have to recognize what we're doing. And if we allow that to sort of happen within the neighborhoods, they will fundamentally change into frat party neighborhoods. We're already having it with neighboring houses that are close to each other, but if we have 3 that are a cluster altogether, this will become party central for the university, because we know the university doesn't want to accept the liability of having drunk students do the kinds of things that they will do at these parties on campus. Having them off campus then lowers the liability for the university and puts it on the neighborhoods to try and regulate in some way. And that's what part of the neighborhood is worried about. We've already had a taste for it. So this spring, we've had 2 parties with multi-hundred person live music, lots of drunk people happening. And it was difficult for the neighborhood to manage that. The police were called many, many times. And this will just increase. So the city council is in a position where it can think about imaginatively, creatively, in a way that helps the students find off-campus housing, but in a way that doesn't encourage the kinds of multi-hundred person parties and dangerous activities that we don't want to happen within the neighborhoods. And I'm sure the university doesn't want to have their students engaged in those types of activities too as well, because some of the students could get into trouble if they continue with those types of activities, and we don't want trouble for the students either. So I think it's a good place for the city council to be thinking about what can we do. Maybe there are things to do with about purchasing properties specifically for commercial rental development within these neighborhoods that could be thought about. Maybe there are things about permits for parties and caps on sizes and attendance at parties, even during the day, and not just noise ordinances that kick in at a certain time of the evening, that will help sort of encourage the students to live with the people in the neighborhoods, because ultimately that's what has to happen for this to be sustainable. There are not enough beds at William & Mary for all the students to live there. Students have to live off campus. And so it's about finding a way for that to happen in a way that works for the students and work for the neighborhoods. What's happening recently on Indian Springs is a bit of a tipping point from the point of view of the people who've lived on Indian Springs for a long time, because of the types of activities that occur when students are clustered together in this type of form. So I'd like you to think about the spatial clustering of properties that are designed for rentals like this, and there may be something that can be done to discourage the types of larger group activities that become antisocial. Students have to have fun, they have to have safe places to have fun, and that's okay. But we don't want 200, 300 person live band music with everybody being drunk and all the bad behavior that comes from that happening within the neighborhoods while you're mixing with 5- and 6-year-olds who are living in those neighborhoods, because that's not a good mix. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, sir. Next speaker's card I have is Rowan Lockwood. Welcome.
Thank you. So my name is Rowan Lockwood, 141 Indian Springs Road. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the City Council, for listening to our concerns today. We really appreciate you taking the time and energy to speak with us. So when my husband and I first moved to Williamsburg, we actually fell in love with the Indian Springs neighborhood. We spent 4 years trying to save up to move into that neighborhood, and we were very fortunate. There was a family that was selling for sale by owner, and they allowed us to buy the house sort of under market value, and we were able to settle in this what we thought was the ideal neighborhood. It was a wonderful mix of folks who'd been in the city their entire lives, retirees, professors, students, military families, and more. We moved in right before we had our daughter Lyra, and she just graduated from Lafayette High School this past Saturday. So it was nice to see some familiar faces there. We have absolutely loved the character of this neighborhood. Like, this is the kind of neighborhood where all the neighbors get together and throw a Halloween party, and we all facilitate trick-or-treating. We get together at each other's houses for holiday, Christmas cooking, trade-offs. Everyone babysits for each other, people look out for each other. We all have a neighbor named Thomas who has learning difficulties, and we all spend a lot of time helping Thomas, helping his grandmother out. It's a close-knit, community-oriented neighborhood. That character, I honestly feel now, is under threat. I am also a professor at the college. I love my students. I've been there for 24 years, and I am a huge believer in these neighborhoods that bring everyone together. The difference now is that we've gone from about 5% student rentals in the neighborhood when we first moved in to closer to 50%. And it has really changed the character of the neighborhood. We've increased student rentals, we've increased the number of students per house, and this proposed development that's going in, this sort of 3-lot, 3-house development where every single bedroom has its separate bathroom, is definitely going to bring 12 to 16 students to our neighborhood right along a corner of a road where parking is already really risky and really dangerous. So, this is not a single house where the owner lived in it for a while and decided to start renting. These are deliberate money-making enterprises that are targeting students. It's a really different approach that I think we're seeing in Indian Springs and in some of these other neighborhoods. We're losing our neighbors. People are leaving the neighborhood in part because the character is eroding. I can point to 3 families that have just gotten fed up and they've walked away. Our character has been replaced by red Solo cups, by people vomiting in my front yard, by people yelling at my daughter. My daughter actually learned the F word when she was younger because it was being screamed at 2 in the afternoon, and she came trotting inside after playing in the backyard and said, "Mom, what does this mean?" And so that was an interesting conversation. Recently, we're seeing 100+ parties where they have live bands, and I'm here to tell you some of those live bands are actually pretty good, but our entire house shakes. And that band is a block and a half away. Imagine what it's like for the people with newborn children in the house right next to them. Noise ordinances are not just for nighttime. I'm not sure they were ever intended for people to come in and have rock concerts in front and backyards in the middle of the day or night. We now have the situation where we have another neighbor that has learning disability needs, and his school bus can't come down the street because we're so parked up that they literally can't fit down the street anymore. We have kindergartners on the far end of the neighborhood who have to be walked up to 3 blocks away. They would normally be picked up because they're kindergartners outside their house, but the bus can't fit. And my question is, if the bus can't fit, can fire engines fit? Can ambulances fit? We're really seeing a huge increase in the number of people and a big change in the character of the neighborhood. I think John presented some specific ideas in terms of maybe permits for parties, in terms of noise ordinances that exist during the day as well. I think tracking who is living in our neighborhoods and to what extent, what percentage kind of rental they are, not just student rentals, but what percentage rental they are in general, I think is really important. And so we're asking you to please help us and our neighbors on Indian Springs to really preserve the character of this very historic neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. So that concludes my speaker's cards, but if anybody else would like to come forward. I would just, if you have something you want to present there, you're welcome to, but.
At a recent city council meeting, I listened to a city employee talk about how to retain small businesses in the city of Williamsburg. What about how to retain residents in the city of Williamsburg? This town is losing permanent homeowners right and left, as you've been hearing, because they and we are fed up with the decline of our historic neighborhoods, due solely to landlords turning these houses into commercial developments. This is what happens when our once charming neighborhood homes are turned into student rentals. This was a recent party. Hanging out of the windows, on the roof, loud music, drunk. We called the police. What happens is the police come shut it down. Would you like to see it up close?
I think we see it. We see it, Ms. Carr. Please stay at the microphone. Yeah. Yeah, we see. Thank you.
And then they'll just move on to the next house. So we have to call the police again. You've already heard about the public urination, the obscenities, the kids all over the street. We can't drive past them. City Council is supposed to protect the character of the Williamsburg neighborhoods. There is no character in this picture. We were all excited to hear that the former Hornsby house was sold, we thought, to a couple who was interested in making it their home and joining the fabric of our neighborhood. But sadly, no. Another landlord situation. He's planning a commercial development for the sole purpose of making money. If the former Hornsby house becomes a student rental, and he's allowed to cram 2 more new builds into the tiny lot for the purpose of student rentals, we're going to have a very hazardous situation. Indian Springs was not meant for the number of cars that the existing rentals already have. The school bus has given up. The trash truck driver has a hard time. So, as she said, what about emergency vehicles? I have pictures. This is already the 300 block without any new development. A truck can't get through. We neighbors recently staged a parking scenario. We calculated how many students could possibly take up the development, the Michael Field development with the former Hornsby property. We parked our cars, as these students will do, along both sides of the street. May I approach? This is what you're going to...
Go ahead and finish your comments, and then you can pass that up, and we'll take a look at it. Don't want you to
do
run out of
that.
time. Thank you, Ms. Carr.
So anyway, character, you're supposed to protect it. So please put a stop to any more student rentals. Do not allow for any new structures to be built for student rentals. Character is children riding their bikes along our lovely street, neighbors walking their dogs and stopping to chat with one another. This is not character. So would you like to have the pictures?
Yes, sure, I'll take them. Thank you, Ms. Carr. Much. Thank you. Would anybody else like to come forward? State your name and address for the record, please, Mr. Carr.
My name is Bill Carr, 316 Indian Springs Road. Been a resident for 36 years. What I want to do is give you some stats that I've calculated over the years, and then I want to share with you some thoughts about one measure you could take to calm down all the parties. So here are the stats. Currently, there are 47, according to my walking around the neighborhood, 47 single-family residents, number of occupants, 95. Student rentals, 19, 5 for a person. Legal number of students, 58. Suspected number of students, 67. If you add what Mr. Fields wants to do, it will go to 12 students, and it would increase it to 70. 58 plus 12, 70, okay? The suspected number will increase to 85, because we all know there are more than 4 students typically in these houses, all right? When you look at the census, suspected students to single-family residential owners, the census is 89%, okay? When you look at the total SFR to total units, it's 67. If Mr. Field gets to do what he wants to do, the total rental to SFR census is 96%. What I'm trying to demonstrate through numbers is Indian Springs, with this, if this development were to happen, would clearly shift more to the students in units and then also population. Now, what can you do about, we talked about, other speakers talked about parties. I've shared this with a couple members. I just want to go through it really quickly. Have a permit for any parties, and here are my bullet points, real quick. Have a fully submitted application to the city 10 days before the event. Have a $25 application fee. All tenants, homeowners, that includes me if I want to throw a party. Full names and cell phones and home addresses on the application. Time and date of the party. No rain dates allowed. Duration of the party cannot exceed 11 p.m. Aggregate number of attendees not to exceed 150. If larger, additional permit information is required. If a band is included, the name of the band, contact information. Band and crowd sound level must not exceed current city limits. No fraternity or sorority sponsored events. An ABC permit is required. A copy of the ABC permit needs to be submitted to the city. I think liability life insurance and the agent name should be on the permit as well in case something happens and someone gets sued. That information would already be available to the city and the lawyers, and they can kind of work it out. The name and signature of directly adjacent homeowners should be on the city application as well. That means the college kids have to go talk to the neighbors to the right and the left, tell them what's going on, and they sign that so they know that this party is going to occur. City of Williamsburg permit and ABC permit be clearly posted on site. City of Williamsburg planning codes and department share the information with the police and the fire department. If there's something goes wrong, they already have the names of the students, the cell phone numbers, because they have it on the permit that is shared with the police department or the fire department. Violators who do not adhere to the permit are prohibited to having a party for 1 year. And then whatever other requirements that city council and the lawyer decides is appropriate. But this is one step that you can do. And it will take a little bit of time, so I wanted to bring it up today such that maybe we could work this out before the fall semester comes. I'll be delighted to work with whomever, but this is something well within your all's purview, and I hope you will take this under consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Carr. Would anybody else like to come forward? Welcome, Ms. Murphy. Good.
And members of council, Carolyn Murphy, 221 Yorkshire Drive. I got a couple of things I would like to talk about today. The first one is the comp plan. The city has done 8 comp plans, 53, 68, 81, 89, 98, 2006, 13, and 21. Harlan and Bartholomew and Associates and the Cox Company were the 2 consultants the city used for the first 5 plans. The last 3 plans were written by staff with contract help from the Planning District Commission on the economy, population, and transportation sections. The transportation section was updated also for James City, York County, and the city at one time since we are interconnected. The first 2 plans were done without a planning staff. The 2 consultants did not have the benefit of a professional staff until Bill Medler and Reed Nestor were hired in the 70s and 80s, and again with very small staffs. Also, we seem to forget that computers were not a part of our daily lives until the 80s, and with the city not having computers until the early 90s. Also remember the planning department was small with no computers, which made it difficult to produce a comp plan in-house for the first 5 plans. For the last comp plan update, I looked at the 2018 budget and it contained $40,000 for the comp plan update, which is used for the PDC, copying, printing, meetings, and so forth, which is a far cry from the proposed $600,000 for the next update. We now have the technology and staff to update the comp plan without spending $600,000 for a comp plan update. With 2 professional staff members, both with master's degrees in planning, and a graphic design professional on staff, it can be done with existing staff with some outside help without costing $600,000. Consideration needs to be given for staff to update the plan with some professional help on certain sections, as was previously done for the last 3 plans. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the library. I also want to state that the city needs to consider the following before proceeding with a new library building downtown. Evaluate the cost of renovating the existing library. Determine the library size needed in the city based on the library James City County is constructing with their new office complex. And last, what is the real cost of constructing a new library to include not only the construction cost, the cost of the debt, and the cost of furniture, fixtures, and equipment for a new library? These items need to be evaluated and addressed before we proceed with a new building. And also, in closing, several citizens have asked me, can you give a date when the 2026 adopted budget will be posted online? And thank you so much.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, seeing none, I'll close the public comment portion of the meeting and thank you all for speaking, and we'll move on to background presentations and take it to Shelton.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. Every year we do this where I give you highlights from the General Assembly session. This is not, here's my standard preamble, this is not intended to be an exhaustive list. These are things that council is likely to see again or things that are of specific interest to the city. House Bill 2029 provides a new set of requirements for the city's real property tax deferral program for elderly and disabled residents. Those include a requirement that all the delinquent taxes must be paid or an installment agreement executed prior to the entry into the program. It provides a new requirement that we post the program on the website in a clear and conspicuous way, a requirement that the notice be provided in the real property tax bills each year, and also that the program can be entered mid-year and a prorated deferral for half the year be provided. This is a income-limited program for people who are elderly and disabled, 65 or older. It is a deferral program in the city, not an exemption program in the city. So the taxes still have to be paid, but they aren't required to be paid. As long as someone is continuing to be qualifying for the program, they aren't required to be paid until the property changes hands. House Bill 1743 creates a study group with the Department of Taxation to look at businesses that do business out of state. So they're located in a jurisdiction, but some of their business is directed out of state, to include various aspects of it. This bill started as a tax exemption for the out-of-state business if the state in which the business is occurring also collects the tax. So this got backed down to a study for this year, but I think you can expect to see some version of this next year. House Bill 1792 increases the limits for the value of real property that the locality can sell on its own without going to the court for a tax sale. So that is now $10,000. This increases it to $15,000, and then it's higher for different categories of property. For example, if it's an acre and it has a structure on it that's derelict, or if it's located in an urban renewal revitalization zone, then it's up to $40,000. This program isn't particularly helpful in the city of Williamsburg because the land values in the city are higher generally than the cap. House Bill 1970 provides a new designation for tax exemptions granted by the state for nonprofit institutions of learning that are licensed by the Department of Education and provide services to individuals with disabilities. House Bill 2245 limits the methodology for assessments that the tax assessor is allowed to use for certain federal programs for affordable housing to the income approach. So there's the cost approach, the comparable sales approach, and the income approach. The property owner has to provide specific data that's provided in the statute to the assessor in order for this to be the case. Utilization of the income approach is only required if the property owner provides that data to the tax assessor. The Department of Taxation is required to provide a uniform reporting schedule for that. So if you think about Section 8 housing, that's what we're talking about here. House Bill 2383. So when a short-term rental is rented through an accommodations intermediary like Airbnb or Vrbo, the accommodations intermediary is the one who reports, collects, and remits the taxes. This bill provides that that information that they provide to the city tax assessor's office, the Commissioner of Revenue's office, remains confidential. It also provides that if that is the case, then the provider does not have to file a tax return for that. It's the responsibility of the tax intermediary. The property owner has to provide basically an affidavit that says that they are using an intermediary, and they have to file that once a year, and it does not count toward any retail sale of the space that the provider gives. So if the provider is renting it for 5 weeks a year, they still have to report those 5 weeks a year. And this was a compromise between Airbnb and the Commissioner of the Revenue. Senate Bill 1476 allows the court to petition for a special commissioner to execute necessary deeds to convey real property to the locality, or to a land bank entity, or to a nonprofit that operates as a land bank. When a property has been vacant for 5 years, is derelict, and is delinquent on real property taxes. This is from Bristol, Virginia Intermont College campus, is the impetus for this bill. The locality or the land bank can then sell the property on to a third party for a nominal value, but that sale has to include requirements that they renovate the property within a time frame that can't exceed 2 years. There were several changes to procurement law this year. Senate Bill 913 requires that we add to our standard form contracts and to any contract that we enter a requirement that prohibits the use of forced labor or indentured child labor in the performance of a contract. So we have several of these public policy things that we are required to put into our contracts. This is a fifth one. House Bill 2751 adds military family-owned businesses to the list of those persons for whom the public body shall not discriminate in its contracting, and it requires us to establish programs consistent with VPPA to facilitate the participation of military-owned family businesses in procurement. So like minority-owned businesses or women-owned businesses, we have now military-owned businesses. House Bill 2024 provides that localities cannot prohibit in its contracts the use of solar panel equipment and facilities that are manufactured in the United States. I do not know what the impetus of this bill is. House Bill 2150, Mark Barham can tell you that I get a little irritated with IT contracts because you enter into a subscription or you buy software, and these are contracts of adhesion. So you take it or you leave it. This is a particularly helpful bill because in those contracts we always have jurisdictions that are located in other states, public bodies, localities are creatures of Virginia law. So we don't know what the law is in other jurisdictions, and we want to litigate any cases in Virginia. So we can put into the procurement manual a provision that requires that the choice of law and the jurisdiction are Virginia. And once we do that, those provisions are then enforceable as state law. We will have to amend the city's purchasing manual and the standard form contracts as a result. A couple of public safety bills. House Bill 2458 allows for the operation of utility trailers on public highways without taillights or brake lights, as long as they have at least 2 reflectors or at least 100 square inches of reflective material that outlines the rear of the trailers. This applies everywhere in the state except for Planning District 8, which is Northern Virginia. House Bill 2724 creates a framework for the use of the flock cameras. So the data has to be purged after 21 days. It requires law enforcement to adopt a policy governing the use of the LPR systems. It requires reporting to the Department of State Police every year regarding the LPR system and its use. And it exempts LPR data from release under FOIA. That doesn't mean that someone can't get their own LPR data. You just can't get anyone else's, because there's the Data Collection Act, which allows you to obtain your own records from localities. So this only exempts the one and not the other. House Bill 2725 adds third-party services. Again, this would include Flock or third-party subscription services to those surveillance technologies that we provide reports on each year to the Department of Criminal Justice Services. So we have to report to the state police and to the Department of Criminal Justice Services. Senate Bill 1272 adds a trespass offense for flying a drone over public services or utilities as those are defined in the Code of Virginia, or over critical infrastructure as provided in federal law, and so that includes military bases and federal maritime assets. Violation is a Class 4 misdemeanor, and it would include the water treatment plant and other facilities that are around the city. House Bill 2051 provides that the school superintendent and the audit committee can meet annually on the grounds of any public school to talk about the safety assessment that they do every year. So every year the schools are required to do a safety audit. Law enforcement is represented on that audit. The chief law enforcement officer of the city can also obtain copies of those reports. This adds one more layer to reporting to that. House Bill 1914 requires the localities to pay compensation to individuals who are wrongfully incarcerated based on intentional bad acts. So if the city, for example, arrests someone and either fabricates evidence or an employee withholds exculpatory evidence, and a court determines in the course of prosecuting that person, or a writ of habeas corpus, or some other proceeding where the court determines that someone has been wrongfully incarcerated, we are then required to pay compensation. The compensation the locality is required to pay has to be at least equal to that of the state. I do need to correct one thing. The compensation is $55,000 per year plus an additional $30,000 payment. If the locality doesn't make this payment after court makes this finding, the governor has the authority to order the comptroller of the state to withhold any payment to the locality that has been appropriated in the state budget, or any part of them, and those funds are required to be paid to the person who was wrongfully incarcerated, and we will not receive those funds until that person is actually paid.
Ms. Shelton, just out of curiosity, so if it's deemed that somebody was wrongfully incarcerated, typically they would sue.
So this is an alternative process to that provided in the state code.
So does this exempt, if they receive these funds, does that preclude them from suing in the future?
House Bill 2330 amends the notice requirements for rezonings. So currently, when the rezoning involves 25 or fewer parcels, the individual notices that are required to be sent to the surrounding property owners are required to be sent via certified mail. This section amends that and allows them to be sent via first-class mail. The planning director has to make an affidavit that the mailing was made, but she has to do that now anyway, and so this is a cost savings to the city for the cost of the certified mail. House Bill 2533 adds tiny houses and accessory dwelling units to those housing types that the comprehensive plan may consider. This is the final step from last year. So remember, last year there was a bill where accessory dwelling units were proposed to be included in every single-family residential zoning district in the state, and that was sent to a committee to study, and that study came out and said that the better course of action is to put it in the comprehensive plan, and so this bill does that. House Bill 2153 directs the Department of Housing and Community Development to develop a document outlining alternatives for zoning permits, site plans, application incentives, and other considerations that a locality can think about when they're implementing an ordinance to stimulate affordable housing for properties that are owned by tax-exempt organizations. And that has to be published by December 31st of 2025. And when we get to failed bills, I'm going to tell you how this bill started. House Bill 2660 reduces the amount of time that the local planning commission has to act on proposed plats, site plans, or development plans from 60 days to 40 days. For a preliminary site plan, it's 45 days. It further reduces the time for planning commission to act on a resubmitted plat or site plan or development plan to 30 days. It adds a new administrative review after the third or subsequent submission of any of those documents, and that has to be completed within 14 days. If a state approval is required for a plat or subdivision development plan, that goes from 45 days to 30 days for them to review it, and we have to submit it to the state within 5 days instead of 10. So this has universally shortened the timeframes for reviewing the development plans that we see. Added to that,
Well, it seems odd that they would, because that takes away public opportunities for input.
well, and there's more.
Okay.
Senate Bill 974 removes the Planning Commission from that process entirely. So the city has to designate a designated agent who is an employee of the locality and designated by the city council to review and act on all of those same submissions. For development plans that would come to city council, it will also include city council. So we have shortened timeframes and a dramatic change in how these are reviewed. Revisions to both the subdivision ordinance and the zoning ordinance are going to be required as a result of these bills.
Can I ask a quick question on that? Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, even these, including the tiny houses, which I'm not opposed to the tiny houses, but with the state forcing regulations in our planning process is something that I think we all oppose necessarily, because we don't want them to make decisions for us, because I think our community is unique and
Well, so it changes who in the process is making these approvals. So instead of the Planning Commission, it will be whoever you designate as the designated agent, who will likely, I suspect, be the planning director. It is a drastic change in the process of how we review these documents. And it's very complicated because there are a lot of different processes in the city.
well, then that's unfortunate, because obviously the public body isn't being able to participate. But it's also unfortunate to the planning director, who's going to have to unilaterally make these decisions and take the heat, so to speak. So,
Was there a backstory to this? I mean, like you said, it's a significant change.
I would say the backstory here, Vice Mayor and members of council, is that the state's been looking at ways to streamline the development process, and in their view, they point at local regulations as an issue of making development harder in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I will say, as your legislative representative and our lobbyist as well, we make it clear to the General Assembly members that represent us and others that we meet in Richmond that we do not agree with this. In fact, in your legislative agenda every year, you state very clearly that all zoning decisions should remain local, where the activity actually happens and the impact is felt most. So our legislators know we feel this way, and we share that in Richmond as well. We were unsuccessful in blocking these.
So there's creep, but this is a big creep now.
Yes.
What they've done here.
Absolutely.
I will say that the process for site plans in particular has really changed over the course of the last 10 years. And so unlike zoning decisions that you're making, everything related to site plans is in the city code. And so when staff is looking at a site plan, it's looking at making sure that everything that is required to be in that site plan is in that site plan. And there's no subjectivity related to it. If it's there, it's required. If it's not there, we can't require it. And so those changes have been coming over a longer period of time.
And as we move forward to our legislative agenda, maybe we should put back into the legislative agenda, maybe we can ask for, communities to be opt out of this for special reasons. And so I think if you'll just help us remind us of that as we move forward. Ms. Current Chair, I think you had something.
Yeah, I just had a question, not that I would anticipate, missing a deadline, but I just want to be clear that, say, don't get it done in 40 days, what is the consequence?
It's deemed to be approved.
Deemed to be approved. So if we miss the window, then it just...
That's right, but that's been the case for several years.
Okay, that's what I figured, but I just wanted it to be sort of like out there that like what is the enforcement mechanism, if you will, of this? Okay, thanks.
Senate Bill 1267 allows for the increase of civil penalties for zoning violations pertaining to multifamily residential parcels. It increases it for the second and subsequent violations, and it caps it at $6,000. This is permissive, it's not required. There's certainly been, in previous years, increases in the caps for various violations. If City Council is interested in increasing the penalties, a change to the city code would be required. There is also another one for zoning violations involving non-permitted commercial uses for the second and subsequent offenses, also including a lower cap than currently is provided in state law. This applies only in Planning District 23, and I believe it originated out of Hampton. The bill here also establishes a fixed order of evidence for Board of Zoning Appeals hearings. So in BZA hearings, when someone is appealing a decision of the zoning administrator, the zoning administrator's opinion is deemed to be correct. And it's a rebuttable presumption in front of the Board of Zoning Appeals that the zoning administrator has it wrong. Clearly, somewhere, when they were taking evidence, they required the property owner or the appellant to go first, and that's not typically how we would handle that. It's now required in state law that the zoning administrator goes first and the appellant goes second and is able to take advantage of that rebuttable presumption. If the Board of Zoning Appeals takes the evidence out of order, they have to preserve their objection during the hearing. And so if they object and the BZA doesn't correct the order in which they take the evidence, then it's reversible error. Senate Bill 1263 permits the locality by either ordinance or policy to provide for the full or partial reimbursement of water and sewer connection fees. So for new residential developments. So this is a tool if you're trying to bring a development to the city. So this is not really specifically something that City Council or the city staff can do anything about, but I thought it was interesting, so I included it in the slide. Group homes are an allowed by right use in residential zoning districts, as long as there are 8 or fewer residents in that group home. It's not subject to the city's zoning ordinance. Regulation is handled by the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. This bill establishes a penalty, which is a Class 1 misdemeanor, for operating a substance abuse-related recovery residence without a valid certificate from the Department of Behavioral Health. There was one bill related to specifically council, which was House Bill 2628, which overrides all the localities' charters in the state with respect to when elected officials are sworn into office. So the law requires them to take their oath of office on or before the first day of their term. However, the section 15.2-1522 also contains language which was not amended, which allows a council member or another elected official to be sworn in on the day of the body's first meeting. So for purposes of council, it doesn't change how you have practiced with elections moving to November and being a little bit late in January. I did want to talk about failed bills. This was the one that we were watching pretty closely. It made it through the House. It did not make it through the Senate. House Bill 2641 required that for a 5-year period beginning next year, every locality was required to increase its total housing stock by 7.5% or 1.5% per year on average. Every locality was required to develop a housing growth plan to meet that target of 7.5%. In order to be considered a good faith plan under the statute, you had to include 3 of 9 strategies, which included eliminating minimum lot sizes, simplifying permitting procedures for multifamily projects, rezoning single-family districts to multifamily, allowing multifamily as a permitted use in all commercial districts, repurposing office and strip mall space to multifamily, eliminating parking requirements for multifamily, eliminating requirements related to aesthetics, material, shape, et cetera, which is the realm of the ARB. This bill created an appeal to the Department of Housing and Community Development. That board would be staffed by their staff. Basically, it's an appeal board for anything that City Council said no to. So a rezoning for housing that Council said no to would go before this board. If the board finds that the locality failed to meet the growth requirement, 7.5% or 1.5% a year, and failed to implement the plan with 3 or more of the required elements, and rejected more than 25% of the proposals in the prior 5 years, the board is authorized to overturn the local zoning decision in this bill. We would not meet the 25% provided in the bill, and any strategy would have to include 3 of those 9 things, which are pretty dramatic things. So this didn't make it past the Senate, but it was another bill that we were concerned about.
Well, and it's another clear example of what I think is overreach from the General Assembly on local zoning ordinances, because not all jurisdictions are the same. And I think, we heard a lot today from our residents about concerns about our neighborhoods, and something like this would allow for ADUs to be built on properties. If we cut lot sizes, available buildable lot sizes in half, and then you get more units, in neighborhoods that are not conducive to the neighborhood. So I'm glad it failed, but I think, it's another indication of the pressure that we're facing the General Assembly to build houses.
And there's more. House Bill 1758 required each locality to prepare an inventory of its own real properties, so properties owned by the city that would be suitable for the development of affordable housing. If then the locality chose to sell that property, the bill required the locality to offer it for 180 days, and then that was amended to 120 days, to eligible organizations, and those would be qualified by the Department of Housing and Community Development for purchase, lease, or exchange to develop affordable housing, and that housing would have to be affordable for 30 years. House Bill 2054 permitted localities that have already adopted an affordable housing program to negotiate as part of an SUP or special exception that any proposed assisted living facility also include affordable housing units, and that was vetoed by the governor. Senate Bill 1313 provided a menu of affordable housing strategies, which looked remarkably like this bill, that could be adopted by ordinance. That was also vetoed by the governor. In his veto message, he talked about localities where this is really a big problem, already have the ability to do a lot of those things. Senate Bill 839 required localities to allow by right development for multifamily residential uses on all land contained in commercial zoning districts. And as you know, we don't have a tremendous amount of commercially zoned property in the city. Senate Bill 1178 required localities to, I'm going to go back to the House bill that created the study. This is the Senate bill that was a companion to that. It required localities in their comprehensive plans to incorporate strategies to support affordable housing by religious organizations. That was a requirement. It permitted localities to adopt simplified zoning or simplified approval processes for religious or nonprofit organizations to develop affordable housing on their own properties. Okay, so we're out of zoning now. House Bill 2764 is the collective bargaining bill. This was vetoed by the governor. Currently, the city may, but is not required, to recognize public employee unions. I think it's really just a matter of time before we are required to do so. The governor vetoed this bill. I would imagine it is going to come back. There were a couple of FOIA bills. Senate Bill 876 required localities to post its agendas as usual. If an item, however, was added to the agenda after the agenda was posted, the city council or whatever public body it was could discuss but not act on that matter at that public hearing. So you would have to wait until your next meeting to act on something that is added after the agenda is posted. That did not pass. Senate Bill 1029 limited the fees charged for producing records to the median hourly rate of the employees or the actual hourly rate of the person performing the work, whichever is less. I don't know that you remember last year there was a bill that provided for the same thing but exempted local governments from that requirement. This bill did not exempt localities from that requirement, but it also did not pass. Last year's bill required a reenactment clause. It didn't pass this year. Just for purposes of reference, the FOIA page that we have on our website, we had 184 FOIA requests received through that page. That does not mean we had 184 FOIA requests. It just means those are the ones that came for the FOIA page. The actual number is higher, but it's harder to capture because FOIA can be done in so many different ways, from emails directly to a department head or another staff member to phone calls. And so we can capture what we collect on the FOIA page, but it's harder outside of that. And finally, I started last year's legislative update by telling you that the retail cannabis regulations did not pass last year. They did not pass this year. The governor vetoed the bills. So I'm happy to try to answer any questions that you have. I'm sorry, I know I go through that really quickly every year.
Well, it's certainly, I mean, that was a lot, but it's really just a small fraction of what the General Assembly passes every year. Would they pass 1,700 bills, Michelle, is that right? So not all of those affect us directly, but has some impact on us. So again, I would just, very leery of those efforts to interfere with our zoning ordinances, and because I just believe that those ordinances that we create are designed for our city, and really, have somebody from Northern Virginia opining on what is best for us, I don't think is in our best interest. So, thoughts, questions?
Yeah, no questions. Thank you, Ms. Shelton. I really appreciate, too, you taking the time to bring forth the ones that failed so that we know what's on, to keep on the horizon for next year again, to keep our eye on those things that might impact Williamsburg. Thank you.
Yeah, I don't have any questions, but thank you for laying all this out. And, I just want to echo the comments that have been made, so thank you.
Barb's got nothing to say.
Well, thank you, Ms. Shelton, for the presentation and just the comprehensive review of all that will be passed. I did have one question going back to I believe it was the designated agent. I wanted to ask, will this designated agent be subject to the guidelines established within the current framework that we have that the Planning Commission follows, or will they be able to just follow new guidelines that they establish?
So they're going to have to follow the city code in the same way that the Planning Commission would have to apply the city code to whatever subdivision plats or site plans are in front of the designated agent.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you, Ms. Shelton. Okay, if there's nothing else, we'll move on to council communications. Anything? I'll just say I did attend a graduation this weekend. Congratulations. It was a great event. Yeah. Takes us now to open forum. Again, if anybody would like to come forward, this is an opportunity. Okay, seeing none, we'll close the open forum, and I don't believe we have any closed session, do we, sir? Okay, would somebody like to make a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
Ms. Williams?
Aye.
Ms. Ramsey?
Aye.
Mayor Pons?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Dent?
Aye.
Ms. Kernshire?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.